one can tell you the news.
We welcome Diamond and Silk.
Mark Zuckerberg will end up, and it's going to be a face without the book.
Book without the face.
Hey, Megan, how are you?
Now they're chipping away at the normalization of pedophilia, and the left is embracing this type of behavior.
We welcome Dinesh D'Souza.
I know I ticked him off. In a certain sense, it's a giant up yours to Obama, and that's why the left is freaking out over it.
Jack Kennedy and LBJ, Clinton, and the double standard from the left.
Yeah, I love how the left does nothing but push the most bizarre practices down our throats and up our tailpipes.
It takes a real man to tackle the hot issues that really matter.
Michael Hart is the man of this house.
Welcome to the Michael Hart Show.
Hello, it is the 7th day of August 2019, and you're listening to the Michael Hart Show right here on the Heart of America Broadcasting Network. Check us out online, heartofamerica.net, heartofamerica.net. Also, you can find out more about the show over at The Michael Hart Show, which is specific to the show only, whereas heartofamerica.net gets into the speaking, the offerings, the talks that we do, and so many other media things that we are up to. And if you would like to find out more about the book that started it all, The Unknown America, just go over to theunknownamerica.com. So 3 websites for you, theunknownamerica.com. We have a special up there for you right now. You can get a seriously deep discount on copies of the book if you would like to have it. $62, including shipping and handling. Get you 5 copies of Unknown America, Myths and Little-Known Oddities about the greatest nation on earth. You guys continue to be so supportive of that project. And remember, not only are you getting a great book with a lot of wonderful facts and data from American history, but it goes a long way in support of this program as we continue to try to grow this puppy as much as we possibly can. Have heard from a lot of new folks over the course of the last several weeks, well over 100 new subscribers to the YouTube channel, and you can do that over at the Hart, H-A-R-T, Heart of America, over at YouTube. Check that out. So interesting videos. We're getting 2 or 3 more put together for you right now. Today is the Red Flags of Flying edition, and on the heels of the recent shootings in El Paso and Dayton, President Trump has tilted towards the possibility of expanding red flag laws nationwide. Will this curb the violence? What are the red flag laws? Who, if anyone, will benefit? Who, if anyone, will suffer? What has occurred in states where these laws are currently used? Dan Wos, the author of Good Gun, Bad Guy, is going to join us to help break down all the confusion and the concerns. Also, some very disturbing and troubling comments from, well, one former FBI, now NBC News contributor, raising suspicions over Trump's order to fly the U.S. flags at half staff until August 8th. We are working on an edition of this program. It might come out tomorrow. Most likely it's going to be Friday, when we are going to do one that we're going to call The War in America. Because, folks, if this guy is, if he's being serious, and he seems to be, it is on. And I do mean that with a big O. But first, without any further ado, let's bump out there and bring our good buddy, author Dan Wos, into the program and help us flesh out some of the more disturbing gun discussions of the day. And we welcome Dan Wos into this edition of the Michael Hart Show. Good morning, Dan. How are you?
Hey, Michael. I'm doing good. How are you?
Mouthful of coffee, because I do this early in the day, at least for some of the country. You know, it's been a weekend,
good.
Dan.
Other than these nasty politicians trying to push more gun restrictions on us, I'm doing fine.
Yeah. You know, I want to talk about the red flag thing here because you're an absolute expert in it, but I don't know if you have happened to have heard this particular piece of audio, and I want to kind of fold this back into what you and I talk about, because you and I don't just talk about gun rights, because gun rights is already settled as far as we're concerned. But the rhetoric from the left, it's left the solar system, Dan. It's gone completely whack. And I don't know if you've heard this, but I want to play it for you real quick. This is NBC News contributor. His name is Frank Figliuzzi, said Tuesday that President Trump's decision to fly American flags at half staff in response to El Paso and Dayton could be seen by white supremacists as a nod to Adolf Hitler. And I don't know, have you heard this particular piece of audio?
No, not yet.
All right, check this out. Now, this guy is former FBI, okay? He was the assistant director for counterintelligence, made this claim during an MSNBC broadcast with Brian Williams. Now, you tell me if this is not one of the most incendiary things you have ever heard, because now this guy, former FBI, now NBC News contributor, is suggesting that Trump is clandestinely speaking to his supporters for the impending, I guess, civil or cultural war in America by flying flags at half-staff. Check this out, and then we're going to break it down a little bit more and talk about some of this red flag stuff.
An example of that. We have to understand the adversary and the threat we're dealing with. And if we don't understand how they think, we'll never understand how to counter them. So it's the little things and language and messaging that matters. The president said that we will fly our flags at half-mast until August 8th. That's 8/8. Now, I'm not going to imply that he did this deliberately, but I am using it as an example of the ignorance of the adversary that's being demonstrated by the White House. The numbers 8/8 are very significant in neo-Nazi and white supremacy movement. Why? Because the letter H is the 8th letter of the alphabet, and to them, the numbers 8/8 together stand for Heil Hitler. So we're going to be raising the flag back up at dusk on 8/8. No one's thinking about this. No one's giving him the advice, or he's rejecting the advice. So,
can you believe this? Now this guy is suggesting that raising the flags on the 8th of August is a sign to the white supremacists in this country as a nod to Adolf Hitler, and of course that the flags currently flying at half-staff in commemoration to the lives lost this past weekend. That's how far off the mark they've gone. And damn, this is exactly the kind of rhetoric that is going to inspire another shooting, as this guy on NBC comes out with his broadcast on MSNBC, and he's also an NBC News contributor and former FBI counterintelligence director, the assistant director, and he's now suggesting that Donald Trump's people, his supporters, are part of this Nazi movement in America. If that is not a perfect example of rhetoric that is calling to incite violence, I do not know what is.
Yeah, I was actually shocked to hear that. That was the first time I heard that, and a couple things that I got from it is that these people are really putting a lot of thought into creating narrative around everything that President Trump does, or everything that Republicans in general do. So you have to really put a lot of creative thinking and a lot of strategic thinking into developing a theory like that, like he just developed. That tells me that he's definitely dedicated and motivated to put in the effort to defeat or to create more. I don't really know what his intentions are, but the effects I think would be very destructive. But this is just how sick Democrats have become. I do believe it's almost a brainwashing of sorts, and they can't seem to think logically. Everything that they do, everything that they say, seems to be filtered through some sort of hatred or rage or destructive thought process. It's disturbing. I don't know where this is going to go. I wish I had more time to think about this and really look at what he said, but it looks a lot like projection, where he's projecting his own thoughts onto President Trump. It sounds like they talk a lot about the dog whistle, where this is a message from President Trump to his supporters. Where do they get these ideas, because I don't remember going to the Trump meeting where Trump said, this is what I'm going to do and this is what it means. It just doesn't happen. These are all thoughts that are happening in the minds of Democrats. So we have to ask ourselves, who are we really going to be concerned with? They understand the dog whistle concept, and they constantly project onto real Americans the guilt of the dog whistle thing, and it's not happening. At least I don't know anything about Republicans and the dog whistle messages. So, but it is happening in their minds. So I would be very careful how we handle Democrats moving forward. They're dangerous and they're volatile.
Well, you know what's interesting about it is how many of them have accused Donald Trump of being racist because of previous comments, okay? And, they can extrapolate whatever they want to extrapolate from it. But you know what I find fascinating is that they're always talking about how obvious and outspoken and the way he communicates the message, it leaves nothing to interpretation. And now all of a sudden we've got these clandestine messages. If Trump is the racist, biggest xenophobe that they say he is, why would he need to have a subliminal or clandestine message to communicate with us when they accused him just weeks ago of doing it openly?
Well, yeah, exactly. This is them. It seems to be that they're just grasping at any possible thing that they can. It's really scary. I never thought we would be in a time like this where Democrats have been so polluted with an ideology. It's hard to explain because we don't understand it yet. We don't really understand what's happening to them, but something is definitely happening to them. You can see it as soon as President Trump came down the escalator, and especially after his inauguration. They went bananas, and they've been scratching and clawing ever since, trying to demonize, the other side of the political spectrum. It's really dangerous, and I hope that they can get help, because I really believe that this is some sort of mental, psychological issue, and I'm not qualified to determine that, but it sure appears that way, and it appears like it's been perpetrated on a mass scale, and the media really just perpetuates it every single day. I watch CNN and some of the left-wing so-called news for as long as I can stomach it. But what I see while I'm watching is really just a consistent diet of anger, rhetoric, fear, and this kind of perpetuated rally cries against our very president and against people who support him. So something's happening there with respect to a kind of a brainwashing or a molding of the thought process, and people are eating it like candy. And there's leverage being put on people to stay within that camp. And while they're in that camp, they're constantly being fed every single day rhetoric like this guy that you just played. So I think at least if we can recognize that much, we can start to see it for what it's worth and try to figure out how we're going to help them.
Right. Well, it's a form of political pornography is what it is, Dan. And it's just like, there's been all these studies and all this discussion about the ubiquitous nature of pornography and pornographic images, in our computerized world today, the access of it, and how people with porn addictions, it affects their intimacy with their significant other. It creates unrealistic expectations. It dilutes intimacy in terms of the way God had meant it. It impacts people's, pardon the expression, functionality, so to speak. It permeates every aspect of the mind. And from a sexual perspective, and in our beings, in our id, if you will, we're all sexual beings. And when you reprogram our sexuality through the use of pornography, it has a major adverse impact on society. I'm seeing a kind of a parallel here where you have a constant diet of porn and all of a sudden your relationships are affected. Then you have a constant diet of political porn and all of a sudden your entire interpretation of the reality around you is affected in a very similar manner. And I think people, and I think your term, a constant diet is spot on, because I just don't think people understand. If you're constantly bombarded with this stuff, I love doing this program and I love hanging out with people like you. I do read throughout the course of the day, but, when I get off the air and, 45 minutes to an hour from now, I'll go on and run my other business interests, and I might look at the news a little bit later on. Last night I was in front of the TV set for 2 hours watching the movie Major League with Tom Berenger and having a beer. I didn't even think about what was going on in the world around me, while there's people out there with this constant addiction to what's going on the left, while they're, sitting around pleasuring themselves watching videos of AOC spew her vile BS. So I can't get my head around why people are so immersed with this from the left. But you're right. It's a measure of mass hysteria, which brings us to the reason I wanted to talk to you today, is the hysteria which is now orbiting around the discussion over red flag laws. And although it would seem on the surface that these laws make sense in the see something, say something sense of the word, it's so much deeper than this, and it's a law. It's a legal position that is ripe for exploitation, as well as over interpretation. Do us a favor and explain what the red flag laws are, and let's start breaking it down from there.
Well, red flag laws, they're also called, the technical name is extreme risk protection orders. But, we call them red flag laws because basically what it means is that if there's a red flag of someone's psychological behavior being, dangerous or something, then if somebody raises a red flag with their behavior, then the police departments can have authority to come in and take their guns. So what happens is these laws are and I believe some people that support these laws, I believe some of them have good intentions, but they're not looking at the possible effects. So what happens is if a state implements a red flag law, like New York, where I live, there is one, and I can give you a little more details on it, but ultimately what happens is if somebody says you are a risk to yourself or society, they can go to the cops and they can say, look, this guy is a danger and he has guns. So it gives the police departments the right, the ability to just go in, take the guns, and then the person has to defend themselves in court to regain their rights and their good name. That court process can be very lengthy, and in the meantime, their guns are gone, and they can't defend themselves or their families. So, now I understand the idea of wanting to stop crazy people before they do something, but the way these are set up, it doesn't protect good people from false accusations, and it doesn't provide them the due process that should be afforded to them. So a lot of states are doing it. New York, for instance, Governor Cuomo is really strong on gun restrictions and gun laws. He's really putting the clamps down on good people. And the New York red flag law includes a piece about certified school officials who can determine whether or not a child is a risk or could be a potential risk. So I always use the example, little Johnny gets in a fight on the playground, and the certified substitute teacher or the certified teacher's aide can determine whether or not little Johnny is a risk. She can report little Johnny, and the next thing you know, the cops are at Big Johnny's house taking his guns. So it's a terrible way to put gun owners in a very dangerous. It puts them in a very dangerous position where we don't have the rights that we should. And so that's it in general.
Well, I've heard stories of judges that will restore gun rights to people that have been brought before them, but not necessarily return their weapons. And then, of course, there's as you point out, the lengthy court process, the very specious idea of reporting people that have not engaged in any behavior whatsoever. I mean, what if some woman gets pissed off at her boyfriend and decides to get back at him, and all of a sudden she's, in the proverbial sense, waving that, or the metaphorical sense rather, waving that red flag. And so, it just seems, it's wide open for corruption and, further gridlock in the courts, but it's also a backdoor loophole into full-scale gun confiscation because theoretically, you can pull a bullhorn out and, every liberal in America could accuse every conservative that they know. I mean, you're well aware of the fact I've got two sisters that are both hyper-liberal, and I'm heavily armed. You bring a red flag law to Alabama, I haven't laid physical eyes on either one of my sisters in well over a year. There's been some things going on in my family where I've had to step in and be assistant to some of these people, but I've done it from afar, kind of through emissaries, if you will. But I've been there to support them because at the end of the day, they're still my flesh and blood. But what if one of them gets pissed off one day, makes a phone call? Michael's got a bunch of guns. Next thing you know, I'm standing before the man.
Well, I have a perfect example of that already happening. There was a guy named Gary Willis in Maryland, 60 years old, I think. He, a family member, they had a dispute, and the family member turned him in, and he had his guns, he had cops show up at his door 5 a.m., so banging on the door. He shows up at the door with a gun. What would you do? I mean, if somebody's banging on your door at 5 a.m., I'd have a gun in my hand, and there was a scuffle. They wanted to take his guns. There was some sort of scuffle. I'm not sure of the exact details, but anyway, he ended up dead. They killed him in his front door, and all because a family member accused him of being a danger to society, and he didn't do anything. And even another family member of his even said, I think it was his sister, even said that Gary would never hurt anyone. He may have been an outspoken guy, but he would never hurt anyone. And I did a little video on that called "Red Flag Laws Kill," and people can find that on YouTube. But it's a dangerous thing. So what we're going to probably end up seeing, unfortunately, is people getting hurt, people getting killed, people getting their guns confiscated. I had two people in New York already call me recently and tell me that it happened to them. And with incidents that related to ex-wives or ex-girlfriends and things like that. And they ask me, what can I do? What can I tell my friend? Or what can I, how can I help him? It was a friend calling for a friend. And it's just a real scary and disappointing thing that we're having to deal with. Unfortunately, these things are going to have to go to court, and I foresee people dying because of it.
Well, you and I are both well aware that from the perspective of law enforcement, the most dangerous situation a police officer finds themselves in typically is a domestic disturbance call. So now we are going to create laws that are going to fabricate, in some cases, domestic disturbances, which may very well be coming on the lines of just a relationship dust-up or whatever the case may be. Because every time a police officer is dispatched, his life is on the line. And so now we're going to create these falsified rationales for dispatching law enforcement, as you point out. They typically will show up at odd hours of the evening, over the course of many, many, many years in owning businesses. I've been served before, and, it's not a pleasant experience, but it's also one that at times can be quite tense. And,
sure.
When done in the light of day, it's not nearly as tense. But, in a situation where, like I said, there's a loud banging on the door at night, you don't know what's going on. Am I about to be robbed? Here in my own neighborhood some years ago, only a couple of years ago, we had a veteran that was shot in his own driveway just going for a jog. And this was a good neighborhood. And so, you see people out there that are up to no good all the time. You don't have any idea what the intent is. All of a sudden, a family member or coworker gets pissed off, drops a dime on you. We got cops showing up at the door, and what you just described repeats itself over and over and over again across this country as some kind of half-ass response to a ginned-up problem of gun violence, when in actuality it's political insanity and mental health issues.
Yeah, great point. It's political insanity and mental health issues, and the political insanity seems to be fabricated for this exact purpose. The political part of it is the fuel, and the mental issue, the mental health issue part is something that the gun grabbers will never want to look at. They don't want to fix that problem, because if they fix that problem, they would have to admit that guns are actually not the problem. And
well, let me take it one step further though, Dan. Okay, come with me for just a second?
Sure.
Do we agree that we have a mental health crisis in this country?
I think so, yes.
Okay. Do we also agree that many of the ideas that are held dear to the left are irrational or insane in some cases?
I would have to say yes.
Okay. Then how can we expect people that are mentally challenged on the realities of the world to take on mental illnesses from which they themselves are suffering?
Yeah, that's an interesting point, an interesting way to look at it. They will never admit that they actually may have they may be afflicted with some sort of mental, and we talked about that very first thing we talked about in this conversation.
We are expecting potential shooters to resolve the issue of potential shooters. Let's just put it on the table.
That's a great point. It's a great way of looking at it, and there could be some very, there could be some truth to that. I don't know how they would respond to that. I think what they'll say, trying to be devil's advocate here, is that they're protecting the world from mentally disturbed people, but in fact, everything they do shows us that they're the ones being, affected by mental instability. I mean, when you see them, and you just like that recording you played just a little bit ago, when you hear them talk like that, it's clearly some sort of mental issue that they can't seem to get around, that seems to be perpetuated among them. I hate to say us and them, but
no, I know, but it's mass psychosis, Dan. Because
I think you're right.
Let me just pop the first couple seconds of this audio one more time. I want to bring this around for just a second, so hang tight, just about 5 seconds.
Okay.
An example of that. We have to understand the adversary and the threat we're dealing with. And if we don't understand how they think, we'll never understand how to counter them. So it's little things and...
All right, the adversary, how they think, and how to counter them. He's talking about us, Dan.
Yeah. How they think. They want to understand how we think.
Okay, then let me ask you this. In an adversarial sense, you're at war, so to speak. Are we not, when we go to war, is our end goal not to vanquish our adversary?
Well, yeah, right. So the word adversary.
Okay, now so all of a sudden now, everybody that's a Trump supporter is an adversary. And if you have an adversary that must be dealt with, this is what a former FBI agent said yesterday. Now, you got an adversary that must be dealt with, and we've got to figure out how to think or outthink them. One more time, just 5 seconds.
Example of that. We have to understand the adversary and the threat we're dealing with. And if we don't understand how they...
The adversary and the threat we're dealing with. That is a call to arms as far as I'm concerned, especially if you are mentally challenged.
And the thing that really disturbs me is they're trying to understand how we think. They're desperate to understand how we think, but they can never tell how we think because they seem to be caught up in this terrible adversarial mindset. We're not like that. See, that's the thing, Michael. We're not looking for a fight. We're actually just the opposite. We're trying to prevent bad things from happening, and they seem to be consistently attacking us. And the fuel behind it is politically driven and, like I said, a constant diet of hateful rhetoric. They're being manipulated, and they don't even know it.
Yeah. Well, when I get off the air through the course of my day, one of the biggest conversations that I have amongst my friends here in the state of Alabama?
What's that?
Is who Coach Gus Malzahn is going to start for Auburn at quarterback. I mean, yeah. I'm serious. I mean, it's like we get on with our lives, and we might be politically tuned into what's going on, but I don't know anybody, whether it's you or my friends or Megan Barth or Gina Loudon or anybody else whose political orbit I circulate in. I don't know anybody who's unraveled. We're just kind of like out here, having our glass of wine, drinking our beer, raising our kids, running our businesses, getting on with life. We deal with our political concerns, during this hour, at least for me during the day. And then we just get on with life. Well, you've got the left over here, which seems to be quivering and shaking and girding up for war. And I'll tell you something else, my friend. They're girding up for a war they don't want. They just don't know it.
That's the sad part about the whole thing is that people will get hurt. And seriously, they're poking a bear that they have no business poking. They're going against, America. It's a scary thing for them. I hope that the media starts to redirect them a little bit because they're being directed right toward some sort of a dangerous situation. Because
Dan, let me give you an insight. I don't mean to interrupt you here, but let me give you an insight. Imagine for one moment. Now, just kind of come with me. I'm gonna on a little bit of a fantasy rant here, but just listen to this for just a second.
Sure.
Let's assume that America gets embroiled in an ideological civil war, whatever that looks like. Okay. I mean, we've already have one basically going on, but let's assume for one moment that it does turn violent. I don't really expect that it's going to, but let's assume that it does. All right. We've got factions of people screaming at each other. We've got allegations of wrongdoing and political malfeasance and internment and concentration camps, and there's fighting and battles in the street. All right? The national news media would eat that up. It would be a daily diet of America at war with America. There's not a chance in hell, my friend, that they're going to do anything to assuage the concerns of the American public because they would make out like bandits if America was on fire, and they damn well know it. Is that extreme? Perhaps some people might think that it is, but knowing what I know about the media, they would have untold amounts of content and the undivided attention of the entire nation. Do you remember back when we first invaded Afghanistan, back in the very early days with General Norman Schwarzkopf? I am telling you, my friends would go to this bar every single night in Atlanta, and we would watch the Scud Stud and Peter Arnett reporting from the Middle East while we were drinking B-52s and shooting kamikazes until prime time went off and Carson came on, or whoever it was at that point in time. We primed time the war at that period in time. The news media ate it up, fed us a 4-hour diet of it Monday through Friday, made out like a bandit, put a lot of these journalists on the public stage. They made out doing speaking tours and books and whatever as they had America at war with the world. You think they wouldn't gin that up here in this country for $1? If you think that's not true, you're crazier than hell. And I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about the average American. The media is not our friends.
Yeah, I agree with you. I totally agree with you. I mean, any political, situation or political fallout is so highly, televised and perpetuated through our society. You're right. Unfortunately, you're right.
Well, I'm not trying to gin anything up with my own words, but when I read things like this article, and then we've got Joe Biden, who's now trying to throw himself some kind of a lifeline here. He comes out and talks about how he if he gets elected, he's coming for the assault weapons. Really? Well, first off, the majority of mass shootings in this country have either been rifles, shotguns, or pistols. So we're not even talking about assault rifles or assault weapons that he refers to. Again, goes back to the great unknowing and the great unwashed. Every single one of them seems to be on this same mass psychosis train, and it is done left the station. And, outside of educating people for what's going on in this country, I don't know what else to say or do about it.
Well, another point, you just sparked a thought. The four, if you include Bernie Sanders, the five prominent socialists in our government. You got AOC and her three knucklehead friends, and then you got Bernie Sanders, and they're all pushing socialism. They're pushing it hard, and you can see that divide very clearly in the Democratic Party, with them on one side and Schumer and Pelosi on the other side, trying to say, hey, let's cool it with the socialism stuff, and the impeach Donald Trump stuff. Let's cool it for a little while. And I thought about this, and I was like, this ties in a lot to gun laws. Ever since they started with the so-called assault weapons ban back in the 90s. They had these ideas of socialism, but they just couldn't reveal it. They couldn't talk about it. And now I think the big divide in the Democratic Party is the problem they're having is that they have some people in the Democratic Party who have brought it to light and who have really made it a prominent thing in our society. It's in plain sight now. They want to be socialists. They want this to be a socialist nation. But the problem is, I think the problem that Pelosi is having is that she's telling them, stop this, because we haven't got the guns yet.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because I think what Pelosi's saying, as you point out, is we don't have the guns yet, and we don't have the wherewithal to be able to sell it, because as you point out, the AOCs and the Sanders of the world have brought to light something that the Democrats would much rather have a more stealth implementation of these programs and policies. But you're right, a full capture of the weapons, because they know darn good and well that people say all the time, well, that could never happen in America. Really, ask Abraham Lincoln about that. And so people just don't seem to realize that these things could come to light and come to fruition, and they're not prepared to defend it. But now it's out there, and they're just not quite sure how to sell it to the American public. And you've had the AOCs of the world, which have more or less bastardized the message and made it less palpable for a lot of Americans. But it is the rhetoric from the left, coming from the AOCs and the Sanders of the world, that are ginning up the great unwashed to make these outward movements towards what they're considering to be their adversaries. And the Democrats, I think they're probably quaking in their boots, because they begin to realize that this has transcended into something they weren't ready for it to transcend into.
Oh, exactly. That's the point. We talk about it coming to a potential conflict, a physical conflict. They got to be scared of that. And but it's almost like a couple of adults, talking, having a conversation, putting up their best performance. And a little kid comes in and says, "Hey, Daddy, what about that?" And reveals something about the parent that you wouldn't want them to know. And it's embarrassing. And you're like, "Oh, shut up, kid, shut up." You shouldn't say. Don't say that. I'm trying to have a conversation here. But children will come in and they'll just say whatever is on their mind. They have no filter. And I think that's what's happening with the socialist part, the real radical socialist part of the Democratic Party, is they have no filter. They want it so badly that they're putting it out there. But like I said before, they haven't got the guns. They're not. The Democratic Party is not prepared for anything like that. So here's my future projection. I believe that the heat around the radical socialist Democrats like AOC and those nut jobs, I believe the heat around them will start to cool down, and I believe that they probably in the near future will not be in the media quite as much, because the Democrats need to quell that fire that they got burning there, and so I think that they're gonna calm them down and wait to fight another day. In the meantime, they're going to continue to push for more gun regulations, more gun restrictions, and red flag laws and all this stuff. They need to get real Americans in a position of vulnerability, and they don't have us there. I don't think they ever will. I suppose there's a possibility they could, but I don't think they ever will. But they're going to try like hell.
Yeah, and like I said, the red flag laws, they sound, as is often the times in politics, it's like the Affordable Care Act. They're giving these nice, juicy names that sound like they are, so effective, and they're going to be so wonderful, and they're going to solve the problem. And, right. In areas where we do have them, they haven't solved any problems. I mean, you've got hospitals in Chicago closing their doors because they can't deal with the casualty counts. Baltimore, my hometown, is a complete mess. It's a freaking battlefield. And we see this all across the country, and they're idiotic stances on things. But then again, sometimes I think people fall victim to the belief that the Democrat leadership doesn't get it. They get it, because the Democrat leadership, they don't have to, they're not going to be the ones that are ultimately going to pay the price of what their voters are going to have to pay, because they keep hiding behind their gated fences and their marble walls with their bodyguards. But, they'd be more than happy to have us go out and do the fighting. During the Civil War, there was a lot of debate about the very first draft in this country, and it gave us the very first conscription act. And this was a draft, but people could, at that point in time, if you were wealthy and you got conscripted or drafted, you could hire somebody into your place, which caused one author of the day to make the comment, "Rich man's war, poor man's fight." And that's kind of where the Democrats are right now.
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense. I just hope that somebody in their party, makes some sense to them, and we get back to a place where, although the two parties are very different ideologically, it would be great to be able to see two parties working together. I just don't see it happening, though. I think the ideological differences have grown such a stark contrast. That I don't see any compromise. I certainly wouldn't want to compromise with any of their policies. I have no interest in compromising with them. Right. And I know it sounds terrible, but when you think about it, how am I supposed to compromise with, killing unborn babies? How am I supposed to compromise with, you wanting to take away my rights to keep and bear arms? How am I supposed to compromise with someone who wants to, flood our country with illegal immigrants for Democrat
right.
votes? How are we supposed to compromise with any of these radical ideas? And the sad part is, all the ideas on the Democratic side are radical. All the ideals on the conservative side really just line up with the Constitution and Bill of Rights. There's nothing radical going on over here.
Let me ask this question.
Go ahead. Sure.
All right. We know we have the issue with the mass shootings. And, it's interesting that there was, none, not a single one in the 1900s, and only 2 in the 19-teens, and only 2 in the 1920s, and only 3 in the 1930s, et cetera. And then all of a sudden, we're popping out 50, 60 a year, it seems like, by a mass shooting definition. With that said, we know we have a problem. We also know for a fact, beyond discussion, we have a mental health crisis in this country, partly perpetrated by the rhetoric of the left, social media, video games, no longer having God in school, the ubiquitous spread of pornography, which, you've got this violence against women that we know actually does exist. But with all that said, is there something that can be done? Is there something that we should be doing? And I'm speaking to you, Dan, you specifically, that you would feel like is not a violation of your constitutional rights, but that might help ease or assuage or even, vastly improve the situation? Or is this a matter of this is what we've got because we're not willing to deal with the real issues at hand?
Well, if you're asking about gun restrictions, I haven't seen one that works. I haven't seen any gun restriction that works. Now, if I think that's where you're kind of going with this. So if I were to entertain gun restrictions, they'd have to meet a few different criteria. They would have to prove to save lives, or the gun restriction itself would have to prove to save lives. It would have to not in any way violate the Second Amendment or infringe on the rights of law-abiding citizens. And it would have to not put any good person, gun owner, in danger. I haven't seen any gun restriction that doesn't violate all three of those things. So the problem with the conversation is that we've become so it's so easy to talk about gun restrictions, and it almost implies that gun restrictions work. The truth is gun restrictions don't work at all, because the people who we have to be concerned with are not following them anyway. So I know it sounds like almost foreign to say something like this, that gun restrictions don't work, but it's true. I mean, you show me a gun restriction that actually works and doesn't violate the rights of good people while simultaneously putting them in danger. I haven't seen any.
Right. Right.
Even they talk about magazine restrictions. Okay, well, this is going to help. No, it's not going to help. It's actually going to put good people in danger because we don't have the ability to defend ourselves. You're shortening our rounds. You're giving us less rounds to defend ourselves. Well, that doesn't make any sense. When the bad guy won't comply.
Right. Right.
So the answer is no.
Dan,
there's no gun restriction.
Dan, we're getting a little tight on time here because I'm going to wrap this thing up at the top of the hour, and I do want you to stay with me. I want you to give everybody an idea where to get a copy of your book. But we got a caller or two I want to bring in here as well and give them the opportunity to either agree or disagree. So let's pop out there real quick. And welcome into the Michael Hart Show. Who are we speaking with?
Yes, I'm in love with you.
I'm
in love with you, damn it. I want to be with you.
Hey, we're in Alabama. Make the trip.
I'm in love with you, okay? I cannot stop thinking about you.
See, Michael, this is a problem. They don't know what to say. They don't know how to counter the argument. So they just
stuff. That's good.
They're ridiculous.
It's
funny.
Good stuff. You know it is.
They don't have an argument. I would love for an anti-gunner to come out and just try. Let's just talk about this stuff logically and rationally, but they can't. That's the way the left is. They just shout and scream and scream obscenities. Hey, maybe they do. Maybe they do love you, Michael.
Yeah, but at least, hey, he was cordial. I mean, that was
I think
cordial.
That is a perfect phone call. It's a perfect example of what we're dealing with.
Yeah. Let's get Clark in here real quick. He's always got some great insights. Hey, Clark, you're on the line with Dan Wos. How are you, my friend?
Hey, I'm doing great, Michael. Hello, Dan.
Hey, Clark, how are you?
I'm doing great. Michael, I have been hoping and praying that you would get other callers, but I don't know that that's the one. It was interesting, though.
What's funny, Clark, is that, we only got a couple of callers per program, but I get a dozen emails and half a dozen text messages after every single show. But I think people are just a little reluctant to, because you got to bear in mind, in the old 101 days, when we had conversations and the show ended, that was it. It was done. It was, never to be heard of again. But out here in the world of the internet, these things are archived permanently, and I think some people might be a little reluctant to have their thoughts out there on public record.
It might be a little intimidating, I guess. Hey, Michael, I am probably not going to call you in the next couple of days because I have to go get re-educated periodically, and I'm coming up on that. But, this whole 8-8 thing, I swear, Michael, if there was the right and I got to be in charge of strategery, I would send people out that professed that they had divined that Donald Trump was in league with the Dark Lord Mordor from planet Blastor. The media would pick up on it. Half the left would believe it, and it would point out the absurdity to what they're talking to the people in the middle that get to decide our elections. What do you think?
I know. Well, I think that you're onto something here because, I always liked the Harry Potter movies. I never read the books, but the movies I've enjoyed over the years, although they've gotten darker and darker. But I do think that there's a side of, a portion of the American population that is hell-bent on finding their Lord Voldemort, because there's got to be an oppressor in their lives, because for whether or not they're unemployed or they're not getting enough they're not getting enough in the sack, or their hair is falling out, or they can't find their perfect job, and now they got to drive an Uber or whatever the case may be. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but there's got to be a bugaboo, so they got to find their Lord Voldemort, and that happens to be Trump. So I think you're onto something, Clark.
Well, like I say, I think the left would probably, half of them, pick up on it. And if it would point out to the swing voters how absurd what they're coming to, really, Michael, who knows that 8-8 is Heil Hitler? Come on.
I didn't know it, and I've been studying history for years.
Yeah, and, it continually fascinates me when they conflate Adolf Hitler with the right. And it tells us something about the left in America right now. When they've got Adolf Hitler, a socialist, on the right, and I guess perhaps Stalin on the left, I guess they do think they're moderate and in the middle.
They must. I mean, it's a mass psychosis.
It is. Let me let you finish your visit with Dan, and I'll keep listening, and I'll holler at you Monday probably.
All right. Thanks, Clark.
Thanks, Clark.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's funny that, with the whole 8-8 thing, Dan, that, they're giving Trump credit. It's the darndest thing to me that now all of a sudden, raising the American flag is on the 8th of August, according to this FBI agent, or former FBI agent, is a nod towards Adolf Hitler. How unbelievably asinine is that? There is absolutely no comparison with the Nazi regime and what's going on in America today. I mean, none. Absolutely none. There's even an article that came out today. A lot of people don't realize Adolf Hitler's father was Jewish. Many people don't realize he was adopted. Hitler was an adopted name. And the ideologies that he had were so far afield from what Donald Trump thinks, they don't even know what fascism means. And, when a president is reducing the tax burden on American corporations, that's the opposite of fascism. But they can't seem to get their heads around it. It's just the same jackasses out there that run around screaming about, neoconservatives. And, they never even talk about neoliberalism because they don't even know what that is. But, the education standard in terms of what's going on in this nation today is stunning with how many people there are out there that are allowed to, I'll put it to you this way, Dan, and then I want to hear about your books and your final thoughts. We've aborted the wrong people. If we're going to have it, we've gotten to the wrong ones. The ones that have survived, I don't know. And that's rude, and that's crass. But that's kind of the way I feel about it.
Well, when you talk, the little research that I've done, I mean, not the little, but I've done some research on Hitler and the regime, and it seems to mirror Democrats in so many more ways than it would Republicans. I mean, you think about how Hitler manipulated the press, the media. He even had his own book. That book, Mein Kampf, I think it was called, right?
Yeah,
and
Mein Kampf.
And he that was mandatory reading, and then the way he had his publisher for his newspaper, the only media that they got was his approved media, and then he started to build his forces, and to me it looks a lot like the Democrats with they have the Antifa starting to grow, and they obviously brainwash their viewers with their politically biased media.
What about
the
Hitler? What about the Hitler Youth? What about the nationalization of the media? What about the nationalization of the schools under the Nazi regime, where we have United States Department of Education, as opposed to the way the founders meant it to be a state-to-state issue? You're absolutely positively right. The elimination of your political rivals. A lot of people don't realize the majority of people in concentration camps, they weren't Jewish. They were mostly Germans. They were actually Germans and what they called Roma at the time, because the concentration camps and the death camps, they weren't the same thing. The only one that really was Auschwitz. And so, you have this concentration camp from AOC without realizing this was him rounding up his political adversaries and incarcerating them. Where has he done that in America? So you're absolutely spot on with that.
Yeah, and I just hope that some Democrat supporters can start to see it, that they really have been taken advantage of, and they've really been manipulated. Their whole thought process has been manipulated, and they don't even see it. I really hope some of them will listen to this interview and listen to some of the stuff that we talk about and put their political bias aside and ask themselves the question, is it possible? Is it possible that they are actually the ones being manipulated and their thought process on everything being changed to suit the Democrats? I hope they're paying attention.
I do too, but it's very hard in life, and it's human nature to admit when you're wrong. And
True.
So, all we can really do, Dan, is do what we do every single day of the week, and pick up as much of the truth as we possibly can, and also pick up a copy of Good Gun, Bad Guy number 1 and 2 to learn what's going on with the gun narrative. And with that said, tell us how we can do that.
Well, thank you, and people can get my books at goodgunbadguy.com or goodgunbadguy.net, or they can search Good Gun Bad Guy on Amazon.
Great. Dan, you bring it as always. I always enjoy hanging out with you. You and I have so many great conversations on the air and even better ones off the air. And I appreciate your friendship and your support, everything you do, and I definitely appreciate your hard work. And, back to the conversation we had a day or so ago, you keep the pressure on these national guys, because they need to be up to speed with what's really going on around them, because there's this ever shrinking conservative news reporting that's out there, which is under constant assault, and it's people like you that help protect that. And I applaud you for it. I'm proud for what you've accomplished, and I appreciate you popping by today.
Well, thanks so much, Michael. And same to you. You're doing a fantastic job. And so we're going to keep up. We're going to keep up the fight, and we're going to keep educating people as best we can. So thanks a lot, and I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
All right, brother.
Thanks, Dan. All right, y'all check it out. Go over to goodgunbadguy.net, goodgunbadguy.com. That's it for us. Tentatively scheduled with Megan Barth tomorrow. I'm got a few things I'm working on, so I got to confirm that a little bit later on. So keep an eye on the Heart of America Facebook page, as well as you can find us on LinkedIn. Go over and check out the YouTube channel. It's just Heart of America, H-A-R-T, Heart of America. There's videos up there about the socialist plan for America, what is really going on with Russian meddling, what's happening in our schools. Share these things, folks. We got a lot of nice emails, one in particular from Kelly yesterday, and I appreciate the support, Kelly. I know you listen to the program, and I'm so appreciative of you guys that have helped make this program possible. Go over to heartofamerica.net. Support us on the Patreon link. You can do this for as little as $1 a month. I know that seems like it's not a lot, but it really and truly does help to keep us on the air and growing, because, folks, it's the indie media, the independent media, which is where you're going to get the truth and the facts from. The national guys, they're more interested in selling ads. We're just more interested in telling the truth. The only thing that keeps us going is you. These type of programs are sponsored exclusively by you and your support and your participation. So please consider picking up a copy of The Unknown America at theunknownamerica.com. or if you're over at Hart of America, just heartofamerica.net. And consider supporting us on the Patreon link. The pennies a day, literally 3 pennies a day, goes a long way to keeping us chugging right along, and we would greatly appreciate your support. That's it for us. We'll be back with you live tomorrow. You're listening to The Michael Hart Show right here on the Heart of America Broadcasting Network.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you like what you saw, click that subscribe button down below and also the notification bell to keep updated on all my radio interviews, TV interviews, and the Dan Wos Destroys, where I analyze and tear apart the anti-gun media narrative. My books can be found at goodgunbadguy.net or goodgunbadguy.com. And don't forget, your Second Amendment, it's not a privilege, it's your right.